There is a memory. You know the one. Not because I named it, but because something in you shifted the moment I said it. A scene, a room, a specific age, a specific face, a specific instant when something inside you made a sound no one else around you could hear. And by any reasonable measure, that moment should already be over. It happened so long ago. In the years between then and now, you've built an entire life. You are not that child in that room anymore. Not even close. And yet, when the memory appears, and it does appear, uninvited, in the middle of unrelated conversations, at the edge of sleep, in the stillness of a car, it still carries weight. It still reaches beneath the ordinary surface of your day. It still has the ability, if you pause with it, to pull you backward. You may have named it many things: unfinished grief, an unhealed wound, proof that something in you is stuck. You've tried thinking your way through it, feeling your way through it, speaking your way through it. But nothing has fully released its charge. And that isn't because you failed. It's because you were relating to the memory itself, while the memory was never the wound. The memory is only a marker, a precise imprint placed at the exact point where something in you split. This transmission is not asking you to revisit the event. It is pointing somewhere deeper than it, to the fracture point itself, where the separation began. Stay with this. The Arcturian Council does not send transmissions of this depth without cause. Their awareness spans civilizations. Their patience is not symbolic, it is structural, a form of consciousness that exists outside linear time, tracking the evolution of a soul across decades, observing which experiences dissolve naturally and which remain embedded at a level time cannot reach. What is being addressed here is not random. The collective field is under unusual pressure. The Schumann resonance, the Earth's electromagnetic pulse at 7.83 hertz, has been showing irregular spikes and distortions, thinning the usual density of perception and allowing deeper signals to surface. What rises through those openings is often ancient, pre-verbal material stored beyond conscious reach. This is not about surface healing anymore. It is about what the Arcturian framework calls primary fracture point clearing, the level where the original split occurred. What follows is not content in the ordinary sense. It is a frequency-based intervention aimed at the root structure of a long-standing pattern. If there is a memory your mind keeps returning to, the one that carries an unexplained emotional charge, let it surface now. The exact event is already known to the field. It does not need to be named. Now, here is what is actually occurring beneath perception. Modern understanding of memory shows that high-intensity emotional experiences are not stored like ordinary narrative events. The amygdala encodes them as raw sensory imprints rather than structured stories. This is why they can reappear as if they are happening now, even decades later. The body does not interpret them as past. It reacts as present. That is also why intellectual understanding does not dissolve them. The mind can fully comprehend an event, yet the body still carries the original signal. Deeper still, intense experiences can leave lasting biological patterns, epigenetic shifts that influence how certain emotional responses are expressed. Over time, these can feel like personality traits, even though they are traces of past adaptation. In this framework, what is called a memory is not the wound itself. It is a reflection of an earlier rupture held in deeper layers of the system, layers that operate beneath conscious thought. When the emotional intensity of an early experience exceeds what the system can integrate, a portion of awareness can separate and remain suspended in that moment. Not lost, but held in a frozen loop that continues to echo into the present. That loop is what sustains the charge. And until the loop is addressed, the sensation remains active. What you have been doing until now, understanding, reflecting, working through patterns, has been real work. It has reshaped the surface structure. But it does not automatically reach the level where the original split occurred. That deeper level requires a different kind of contact. Not analysis, but reintegration. If you are following this, bring attention inward. Breathing slows. Awareness turns away from external detail and settles into the body. A gentle light is imagined descending from above the head, moving through the center of awareness, softening the internal landscape as it travels downward. The throat, where expression may have once been held back. The chest, where emotional charge gathers. The solar plexus, where identity and selfhood organize. At each point, something begins to shift, not through force, but through recognition. What surfaces here is not only emotion, but a sense of distance that feels older than recent experience. A quiet heaviness that has no clear origin in the present moment. It belongs to an earlier version of you. And as attention remains steady, something begins to move, not toward the past, but toward integration. The sensation that may arise, tightness, emotion, memory fragments, is not regression. It is release. What was once frozen begins to soften as the system stops maintaining the loop. You are not going back into that moment. Something from that moment is returning forward into you. And as it does, the structure reorganizes. The system stabilizes. The charge reduces. The loop weakens. In the hours and days that follow, this process continues quietly. Old memories may briefly resurface as the system completes its recalibration. They do not indicate setback, they indicate completion. When they arise, there is no need to analyze them again. They are simply passing through as the structure finishes adjusting. And beneath all of this, one thing becomes clear. You were not damaged. What appeared as fragmentation was an adaptive response to intensity beyond what could be fully held at the time. The separation preserved stability. It was not destruction, it was protection. As reintegration continues, certain qualities may return: ease, presence, a sense of being more fully located within yourself without the constant background tension that once felt normal. And over time, what remains is not the memory itself, but the absence of its charge. A shift has occurred at a structural level. The internal loop that sustained the emotional imprint has begun to dissolve, and the system is reorganizing around that change. The next phase of this process unfolds gradually, as perception itself adjusts, not immediately. Not in a dramatic way, but in the subtle way a room feels different after someone has left it, even if nothing visibly changed. You start to notice space where there used to be constant internal pressure. At first, the mind tries to fill that space again. It reaches for the old familiar loop, the old memory charge, the old emotional reflex that once defined how certain moments felt. But something has changed in how accessible it is. It is still there, but it no longer grips in the same way. And that is where the real shift begins. Because what returns after a fracture point release is not emptiness. It is availability. Availability to perceive without immediate distortion. Availability to respond instead of react. Availability to exist without the constant background echo of something unresolved pulling attention backward. For a while, the system tests this. You may notice small moments where an old emotional pattern tries to activate, and instead of fully taking over, it fades midway. Not suppressed, not fought, just incomplete, like a signal losing strength before it can fully form. This is the recalibration phase. And during this phase, something important becomes visible. The memory was never the source of your limitation. It was only the anchor point where your attention learned to loop. Once that loop weakens, attention begins to behave differently. It doesn't get trapped as easily. It doesn't collapse as quickly. It starts to return to the present with more consistency, even when echoes of the past appear. And in that consistency, something else quietly emerges, something that was always there beneath the adaptation layer. A kind of natural coherence. Not confidence in the performative sense. Not positivity. Not forced reinterpretation, but a grounded sense of being here without splitting away internally. You may also notice that certain emotional triggers no longer lead to the same depth of collapse they once did. The initial activation might still occur, but it passes through faster, like it no longer finds the same internal structure to attach itself to. That is because the structure that sustained it has reorganized. And as this continues, memory itself begins to change its role. It stops being a place you are pulled into, and starts becoming something you can observe from a distance without immersion. The images may still appear, but they no longer carry the same authority over your present state. This is the beginning of disentanglement. Not forgetting, not erasing, but separation of identity from imprint. There is also a quieter layer that starts to surface in this stage. Moments of unexpected neutrality. Times when nothing in particular is wrong, yet nothing is urgently pulling attention either. For someone used to internal noise, this neutrality can feel unfamiliar at first. But it is not emptiness. It is baseline awareness without distortion. And over time, that becomes the new reference point. As this stabilizes, you may begin to notice that your sense of self is no longer built around managing what was unresolved. Energy that was previously consumed by internal processing becomes available again for outward engagement, creativity, and simple presence. Even your relationship with the past begins to shift. Not because it disappears, but because it stops defining the frame of the present. What once felt like a central thread becomes a smaller part of a much larger internal landscape. And in that larger landscape, something quietly reasserts itself. The part of you that was never actually fractured. The part that remained continuous even through the split. The part that did not leave, even when other aspects of experience became isolated in time. That continuity was never lost. It was only overshadowed by the intensity of the imprint. Now, as that imprint loosens its hold, continuity becomes easier to sense again. Not as an idea, but as a lived, embodied recognition that you are here, now, without needing to resolve the past in order to stand in the present. And from that place, the system no longer reorganizes around what was broken. It reorganizes around what is intact. And then something quieter still begins to reveal itself. So subtle it is often missed at first because the mind is trained to look for intensity, not absence of disturbance. There is a point in this process where even the idea of healing starts to feel less relevant. Not because nothing is happening, but because the system is no longer organizing itself around repair. It is reorganizing around stability. And stability has a different texture. It does not announce itself. It does not peak or spike or demand attention. It simply holds. You may notice that your inner world begins to lose its need to constantly interpret itself. The reflex to analyze every emotional shift starts to soften. Not because awareness disappears, but because urgency does. The mind no longer treats every sensation as something requiring resolution. And in that shift, perception changes. You start to experience moments where nothing is being internally resisted. No subtle push against experience. No background negotiation with what is present. Just direct contact with life as it is unfolding. At first, these moments are brief. A conversation where you are fully there. A walk where nothing inside is pulling you elsewhere. A silence that does not feel filled with unresolved material. But over time, they extend. And something important becomes clear through repetition. What once felt like emotional complexity was often the system maintaining alignment with an old internal fracture point. When that point loses charge, complexity does not vanish, it reorganizes into clarity. Clarity is not emptiness. It is coherence without interference. There is also a deeper adjustment that happens beneath conscious recognition. The nervous system begins to trust present-time reality again. Not in a conceptual way, but in a physiological way. The need to scan backward for emotional safety signals decreases. This is not something you decide. It is something the body learns through sustained absence of threat activation. And as that learning settles, you may notice something unexpected. The past begins to feel less like a place you are coming from, and more like information that has already been integrated. Not erased, not denied, simply metabolized. There is a threshold in this process where identity itself stops orbiting the old wound structure. The you that was organized around navigating charge, avoiding triggers, managing internal waves, begins to feel less central. In its place, something simpler appears. A presence that does not require constant adjustment. A way of being that does not split itself in order to remain stable. And from that state, even memory behaves differently. It no longer pulls you into its timeline. It becomes something you can witness without entering. Like weather passing through a wide, open sky that is not affected by what moves across it. This is not detachment in the emotional sense. It is de-identification from the imprint. And once that happens, there is a final recognition that often arrives quietly, without ceremony. Nothing in you needed to be fixed in the way you once believed. What was happening was adaptation under pressure, precise, intelligent, temporary fragmentation in response to intensity that could not be fully held at the time. And now, as that intensity is no longer being reactivated in the same way, the system no longer needs to maintain the split. So it stops. Or more accurately, it no longer continues. And what remains is not a new self constructed on top of the old one. It is the same continuity that was always there, experienced without interruption. Unbroken, not because nothing ever happened, but because nothing ultimately succeeded in dividing what you are from itself.